Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to today's live webinar on PATA Visitor Forecast Updates, the impact of reopening on recovery patterns. We have a great lineup of speakers here today with us to present on the impact of reopening on recovery patterns, but first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Paul Brangan. I am the Chief of Staff at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and I will be your host for today. I do have a couple of notes before we head right into our webinar, so please bear with me. I know many of you are familiar with Zoom. So as you can see at the bottom of your browser, there's two functions, a chat and a Q&A. Feel free to use the chat function to engage with other participants. However, please submit any questions to our speakers using the Q&A function as noted on your screen. Please do not send any questions using the chat function. It's just a bit difficult sometimes to toggle back and forth between the Q&A and chat. So if you have any questions for any of our presenters, feel free to drop it into the Q&A function as noted on your screen. So here's just a quick rundown of today's agenda. First, we have a presentation from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, followed by Euromodern International, OAG Visa, and then all our presenters will come back for a panel discussion with our PATA CEO, Ms. Liz Ortiguera, and then we'll also be taking questions from the audience. Now at PATA, we appreciate that during this recovery period, it's even more critical for you to have frequent and multiple perspectives in market insights. For this reason, we started developing international visitor arrival forecasts every quarter. And today we're collaborating with our partners at OAG, Visa, Euromodern, and of course, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University to deliver exclusive and varied perspectives on the industry and specifically our region's travel recovery. In addition, we're happy to launch a new initiative for our international members, a regional recovery dashboard. This new dashboard provides weekly insights to the latest status of key travel destinations across our region, from China to Australia, from Bhutan to Laos. At PATA, we're here to support your destination and your organization in expediting this recovery. And as always, we stand with you during these difficult times. And now, without further ado, we'll move into our first presentation. And with us from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Associate Dean and Ms. Chan Chok Fu, Professor in International Tourism in the School of Hotel and Tourism Management, Professor Haiyan Song, as well as the Assistant Professor at the School of Hotel and Tourism Management at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Dr. Anu Liu. Professor Song, Dr. Liu, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. The presentation will be done by myself and my colleague, Dr. Liu, and Dr. Liu will share the screen. Okay, so basically,
okay, perfect.
Yeah, right. Okay, so basically, this is our second update after the main Asia Pacific visitor forecast 2022 and 2024 was produced last December. So the PATA forecast actually was generated by the forecasting team and at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University in collaboration with PATA. And the main forecast that we generated in last December and November actually was include all the destinations that we generated forecast for. Then some of the things has happened since November last year. So we had the one update in April 2022, and now we are doing the second update of the main forecast report. In the main forecast report, we generated 3 scenarios according to the COVID-19 impact, the situation of new variant and subvariant, and also the degree of travel restrictions. So based on this information, we developed 3 scenarios: mild, medium, and severe scenarios. And then we also made some adjustment in the main forecast to our statistical model forecast in order to incorporate all this information. Next. So this map shows the destinations for which we did our forecast in terms of tourist arrivals and also tourist expenditure to those destinations. Next. And the forecast actually is a 3-stage process. Basically, the first stage is that we use econometric models to generate the baseline forecast based on the data that made available to us. I think from last November, we obtained the data from PATA up to the second quarter of 2021. And then we generate a baseline forecast and also develop the scenario. And then in the last stage, we generate some forecast based on the expert adjustment to our quantitative forecast. Next. So in terms of a scenario development, we actually, based on the policies across different destinations in terms of restriction policies, those policies include zero-case strategy, which has been rigorously imposed by China, for example, and also border closing, visa restriction, quarantine requirement on arrival by different destinations and also different source market. And also we consider whether a destination or the source market have canceled the mandatory quarantine requirement, and also whether it's need PCR and RT test upon arrival. And also the elimination of border control, neutral border control between source market and destinations, and also countries that change their travel restrictions dynamically. You know, we don't know exactly what the policy is, but they change their policy from time to time. So we have to monitor those changes in order to develop our scenario. And then COVID-19 and its subvariants such as Omicron, and also Omicron's subvariant has sustained a very negative impact on tourism arrivals in a few destinations, especially China, Hong Kong, Macau, and a few other destinations within the region. Next. So in terms of method that we use to develop the scenarios, basically we based on our scenario development, based on the previous research that has been done in terms of recovery pattern. So based on those research, we actually provide some theoretical foundation for us to develop the scenarios. And also we look at the impact assessment of COVID-19 either on the economies or on the tourism industry in the destinations produced by such international organizations as Oxford Economics, Euromonitor International, and UNWTO. And those informations on travel restrictions and also the vaccination coverage and also the booster programs, how this actually was implemented in the destinations. And also we, based on our scenario development, based on the announcement and news by different organizations or different destinations in terms of their border reopening to international tourists. So these are the method that we use to develop our scenario. In terms of the update, the second update, so it is a two-stage mixed method adjustment process. Basically, the stage one, we use the previous update forecast, and then we look at whether those forecasts are still valid or not. And if not, then we incorporate the new information that we obtained from PATA in terms of tourist arrivals up to 2022 quarter one So we incorporate this new data and put in the model and run the model again, and then generate the forecast to see whether it is different from our first update in April. If not, then if it's not, then we keep it is. If there's some significant differences, we generate another set of adjustment based on the Delphi expert panel approach. Basically, we did 2 rounds of back-to-back adjustment in order to produce the forecast for this update. So I think now I'm passing the presentation to my colleague, Dr. Liu.
Thank you, Professor Song, for your presentation. And here we listed the key source markets that which we adjusted. We did some adjustment compared to the last round because of the fully lifted border controls and also the relaxation of travel restrictions. Some destinations, if we remember, some destinations they eased all the travel restrictions in April and May, which was after the forecast we generated last round. So we have to update the forecast based on the latest information we have. And here we update the forecast for Mexico, the Maldives, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Hawaii. So as a result, in total, we can see compared to the last round, there is no significant change. But because of the ease of travel restrictions for some destinations in April and May, so we did increase forecast of 2022 compared to last round a bit, which is presented by the green line here, and the blue dotted line represents the forecast we did last round. The orange and the yellow line stand for the mild and severe scenario, respectively. So compared to last round, in the medium scenario, the forecast increased from the recovery rate of the forecast. The recovery rate of the arrivals increased from 32.6% to 36.2% in this round, which is a bit increase. And the forecast of 2023 and 2024, obviously the trend was consistent with the last round we did. For the Americas, we can see that there is a big increase in this round compared to last round in 2022. This is mainly because as the largest destination in the Americas, the key source markets of the USA, which are Mexico and Chile, they opened the border in April, which is after the forecast we released last round. So we increased forecast mainly from the USA to Chile and Mexico. As a result, the total arrivals to Americas increased a bit, which is shown here. And the recovery rate increased from 44% to 51%. For Northeast Asia, because the main destinations, including China, Hong Kong, Macau, Japan, they haven't eased the travel restrictions for tourists. So the forecasts were almost the same as we did last round, which can be reflected here and here. And because of the overall recovery trend, so we increased a bit of the forecast for 2024 from here to 303.5 million. And the recovery rate was almost similar from 2022, 2023 to 2024. For South Asia, the forecasts were also very similar to the last round. This is mainly because the main destinations, for example, India in this region, they had already opened border in January. They didn't change the border control policy. So that's why the forecasts of this between the 2 rounds are very similar. And if we look at the medium scenario, the recovery rate was 38.5 in this round and 37% last round. For Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia is the region that most destinations reopened the border in April and May. As a result, we increased forecast compared to last round, and the recovery rate of this round increased to 24.4% compared to 18.9% last round. Again, the long recovery trend was the same as we assumed that the arrivals will recover to the pre-COVID level by 2024. For West Asia, which is mainly mainly represented by Turkey, although the travel restrictions of Turkey hasn't changed that much, but because the key source markets, the travel restriction policies of the key source markets of Turkey changed. That's why the arrivals to Turkey increased as well, which we adjust our forecasts. And if we look at the medium scenario, the forecast, the recovery rate increased from 73% to 81% in this round. Then if we look at Pacific, again, since the forecast between these two rounds were not the difference was not that much, because although Australia and New Zealand, which are the two main destinations, they reopened the border, but there are still some quarantine policies existing in some states in Australia, which is the largest destination in this region. That's why the forecast, the results between these two rounds were not that, the change of the forecast between the two rounds were not that much. And if we look at the median scenario, the recovery rate only increased from 48.4% to 51.5% in this round. If we look at the key destinations that we did the significant adjustment. For example, Mexico, because Mexico reopened the border in April, so we significantly increased forecast in this round. The recovery rate, as a result, the recovery rate of this round increased from 59% in last round to 84.4% this round. And the forecast by 2024 changed a bit as well. The Maldives, again, although the travel restriction policy of Maldives didn't change, but the key source markets, they changed their travel restriction policies. That's why we also increased forecasts of the Maldives in this round. And as you can see, for the medium scenario, the forecast increased from the recovery rate increased from 89% to 98.5% in this round. This is the forecast of the Philippines. Because the Philippines reopened the border in April, that's why the forecast compared to last round, the forecast increased, and the recovery rate of in the medium scenario also increased from 20.1% to 28.2%. For Singapore, although the medium scenario didn't change that much, but we increased the mild scenario. The forecast increased, and we can see the recovery rate of the mild scenario increased from 118% in last round to 129.6% this round. The reason that we didn't change the policy, we didn't change the forecast of Singapore for the medium scenario is that given that Singapore has launched the travel bubble in the last 2 or 3 years for several times. So when we did the forecast last time, we did have the expectation that Singapore will reopen the border within the limited months. So that's why by that time we have already considered the reopening possibility of Singapore. Vietnam. Again, Vietnam reopened the border in April. That's why we increased forecast compared to last round. And if we look at the median scenario, the recovery rate increased from 6.8% only to 18.9%. Thailand, again, Thailand reopened the border on May the 1st. So we increased forecast and the recovery rate increased from 19.9% to 27.8%. Hawaii. Hawaii, the reason that we increased the forecast of Hawaii because the key source markets of Hawaii, they changed their travel restriction policies. That's why we increased the visitor arrivals to Hawaii compared to last round, and the recovery rate increased from 70.7% to 86.1%. So in conclusion, if we look at the forecasting accuracy compared to in 2021, the forecast error was only 6.34%, which is acceptable considering the outbreak of the new variants. So this is we say this is a very acceptable, accurate forecast. And the most accurate region we forecast is Southeast Asia, which is the forecasting error is only 3.54%. In summary, the total arrivals to Asia Pacific is expected to recover to 832.3 million and close to 7 million and 510 million in the mild, medium, and severe scenario by 2024. The recovery rate will be 120%, 99%, almost 100%, 73% in the mild, medium, and severe scenarios by 2024. Based on our forecast, the Pacific region is expected to have the highest recovery rate, which will reach almost 130% in the mild scenario, 110% in the mild medium scenario, and 83.5% in the severe scenario. Because the key destinations, as we just mentioned, for example, China, Japan, Hong Kong, and Macau, they haven't reopened the border. So the Northeast Asia is expected to have the worst recovery levels compared to other regions. The recovery rate will be only 116% in the mild scenario, 95% in the medium scenario, and 70% in the severe scenario. Okay, this is what we are going to present. Thank you. Now we will hand over the screen to Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Song. Thank you, Dr. Liu. We'll be seeing them again in the panel discussion. So if you have any questions for them, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and they'll happily answer that later in today's session. So we come to our next presenter, and it's our good friend over at Euromonitor International. She's the head of travel research. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Caroline Bremner. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here with you again, presenting to PATA. So I'll just share my screen. Can I just check you can see that?
Yep, looks good.
Great. So today I'm going to be presenting to you about the macroeconomic forecast outlook. And just to say that for those of you who don't know me, I'm the head of travel research at Euromonitor International, and we work very closely with PATA as a research partner. So for today's webinar, topics that we'll explore, first of all, we'll start with the global economy, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into those countries and economies that PATA is specifically interested in. And I'm delighted to also share some brand new survey data from our consumer lifestyle survey along with some industry data that we have on business priorities and engagement with sustainability. So when it comes to the global economy, since we last spoke in January, there have been some major geopolitical events, namely the war in Ukraine. And that has led to a rise in volatility and uncertainty in the global economy. So what we've seen in the past quarter is a revision of global economic output being reduced by 1.2% to now standing at 3.1% for 2022. So that's for the world. When you look specifically at the emerging economies, we can see that there's been a revision downwards of 1.5%, so that's quite substantial. And so again, we're expecting that 3.1% for the emerging and developing economies. And it's very much across the board. And obviously we have, with the war in Ukraine, economic sanctions applied to Russia. That has caused a further exacerbation of the impact on supply. And so we are seeing this, these big disconnects between supply and demand. And that's across, food or energy. And of course, we have rising inflation. So here we're looking at global inflation, whether that's in the world or the different regions of the world. And, we have actually seen a doubling of inflation since January. So this has really been stoked by the war in Ukraine. And of course, that makes it very, very challenging for consumers who feel the rising costs of energy, commodity prices, and food. We can also see that this then has a knock-on impact as well on their ability to spend on products and services such as travel. And on the business side, of course, rising costs is very hard to absorb. And so there is this challenge about, do they pass the costs on to consumers? And of course, it puts a lot of pressure on profit margins. So, we are seeing this big spike of 9.2% in the developing and emerging world, particularly for this year. And there is the hope that, next year things will ease off slightly. But for the moment, things are very, very challenging for businesses as well as consumers. That's not to say that the rebound isn't taking shape. And as we heard from Professor Song and Dr. Liu, that we are seeing the beginning of the rebound in Asia Pacific. And of course, that means this is us looking at GDP for the fastest growing markets that PATA looks at, led by Macau and then Vietnam and Philippines. And we can see these very big, strong increases last year for the likes of the Maldives. And this is, again, thanks to that open policy for allowing visitors to enter. And then, of course, as Professor Song and Dr. Liu were explaining, that the changes in the source market policies is also helping to really sort of allow the recovery to take place. So of course, we'll share these slides with everybody after the presentation. I'm really pleased to be able to share with you our latest insights on consumer preferences when they're traveling. So this is looking at the aggregate of Asia Pacific travelers and what their preferences are when they go on holiday. It's interesting to see the comparison between 2021 and 22, and there's actually been a rolling back in the interest of a safe destination in Asia Pacific. So there is this sense that consumers as well as governments are beginning to accept we've had the virus and the pandemic for 2.5 years now, and we are learning to live with it. And of course, that means that safety is still important, but it doesn't have to be the defining factor of a trip. Relaxation saw a little bit of a drop, and where we're seeing increased interest is actually things like adventure, ecotourism, and group tours, and also in terms of all-inclusive. So again, that's a symptom of rising inflation and rising prices, that consumers are looking for all-inclusive options that allow them to, have fixed costs so that they can manage their budget much more carefully. We also can cut the data and look at which consumers and travelers are choosing sustainable options versus mass market options. So the mass market option, say, for example, could be a package holiday, it could be a shopping trip, it could be an urban trip, it can be an all-inclusive. Whereas sustainability we would see as things like immersion in nature, culture, arts and heritage, and of course, ecotourism. And I do find this very interesting, actually, that in Asia, particularly led by Vietnam and China, that consumers there are choosing more sustainable travel options than they are choosing mass market. Whereas if we look at the advanced world, like in the US or Asia or Europe, there is this strong preference still for mass market features. So it's really interesting to see that Asia is leading in terms of sustainability and sustainable travel features. Now, whether this is driven by income, that was a question that we were asked, and I just thought it was interesting to look at, well, actually, there are low income households, those that earn, up to 11,000, are choosing sort of sustainable travel features. But not surprisingly, it's also in the high net worth individuals right at the top of the income scale that are selecting sustainability. So that is, it does help. But interestingly, in China and India, as well as South Korea, the mid to upper income groups are selecting sustainability. So it's not all driven by income. And it is interesting to see that sustainability is attractive to lots of different income groups. So it shouldn't preclude anybody from being offered sustainability in terms of travel features just because of they may be perceived to be a mid-market consumer. Also, I have some brand new research looking at the engagement of travel businesses when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. So 52% of businesses in Asia say that they engage with the SDGs, which is great. However, there has been a rolling back and a decline of 8% since last year. And this could be just because Asia Pacific has been slower to get up off the ground after the pandemic. And so priorities may be a little bit stalled at the moment. But really interesting to see high levels of engagement with gender equality, which is SDG 5, and of course, engagement with decent work and economic growth. And then finally, the overarching priorities for travel businesses. And in Asia, we see that improving the customer journey is the #1 priority. So that means, providing a safe and seamless and very much connected trip for consumers is important. Removing all those pain points across the whole of the customer journey, whether in trip or during the booking or even at the inspiration stage. And we have actually seen as well a big uplift in the interest in enhancing cybersecurity. And again, this could be because of the geopolitical uncertainty and volatility that we see, and the fact that businesses are now very much more conscious of those cyber attacks and threats that they face. So just to summarize from our Q2 update, inflation is the hot topic. The global inflation surge that we're seeing, we've seen the levels double since January. It really is putting immense pressure on consumers, their ability to spend, And of course, there is a very strong impact on businesses, and they're not always able to absorb those costs. And so again, it's a very challenging outlook that we're looking at. But that's sort of colliding, if you like, and crashing into the reopening of Asia Pacific, which is great to see that governments are rolling back restrictions, and you know, that there is this impetus for positive change, and obviously that reopening will help economies to recover, particularly countries that depend on travel and tourism, such as in your region. And of course, it's so great to see that consumers continue to be interested in sustainability. As we saw from today's data, it's not just driven by price or by income, it's actually they are very interested across the board, no matter what income group they're in. And of course, there is this long-term business priority to improve the customer journey and to obviously prepare for future risks. And the number one risk that we're facing is the imminent climate emergency. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, as always, for having me on the PATA webinar.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Fantastic presentation. And it's good to know that sustainability is high on everybody's interest moving forward. But yes, we do have to keep an eye on inflation rates as we look towards recovery. So thank you so much, Caroline. And she will be with us later in the panel to answer any of your questions. So moving right along, we've come to our next presentation. And with us, we have from OAG, the Regional Sales Director for JPAC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mac Patel. Mac, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Just swap it.
Swap it? Okay, very good.
Perfect.
Okay, so thank you, Paul, for the introduction. And thank you to PATA for inviting OAG for today's presentation titled Asia's Jet Lag Recovery. So if you look at the title itself, you can see that the region has somehow lagged behind other global peers with the recovery stage. So today's presentation, I'll be looking at market recovery in Asia Pacific, looking at specific countries, some of the recovery profile, our assessment for 2022, and how recovery will change the aviation landscape using some of our OAG data, and looking at viability of low-cost carriers and new aircraft models that will disrupt travel between short-haul and long-haul flight network. So if you look at general trend, as I said, Asia Pacific has lagged behind all the major markets around the world in the recovery phase. Very large domestic markets in some regions have provided a degree of protection in some regions. So that's notably Northeast Asia. As you can see in chart A, where you can see total capacity, which includes domestic market. That's characterized by large domestic inflows of traffic within China, Japan, Korea, and to some extent Taiwan. So domestic markets have actually created some sort of buffer for these economies. So if you look at a deeper look at pure international capacity, then you can see some of the challenges that these markets have faced. So if you look at Northeast Asia, based on overall capacity, it's minus 13.5. But if you take international capacity into account, it's down by 87.3%. Southeast Asia, despite the recovery that's happening currently, it's still down over 67%, which is quite significant as key markets are ramping up capacity with international travel. And that will take some time as some markets are facing manpower shortages, and also foreign carriers are having issues with pilot shortages and so forth. So there's a lot of macro factors in that will disrupt some sort of that strong rebound moving forward. And Southwest Pacific, so that's minus 59% on the back of slow international flights moving back in certain markets. So heading to halfway through 2022, and international capacity across regions remained at very low levels, despite the upbeat that we've been hearing from certain corners of the industry. Major markets have struggled. So if you look at China's domestic market, it had that capability of flipping domestic routes and encouraging staycations. So at one point, China was actually offering airfares that was cheaper than a price of a cup of coffee, but that did not translate into profitability for the airlines. So that was to encourage people to get back into the air and build travel confidence in domestic travel. On the other hand, if you look at India, that's outperformed any Asia Pacific country in recovery with a faster capacity rebuild. So I was in India for business travel last month, and you could probably say, where's COVID? Because things were getting back to normal. Domestic flights were full, international carriers were flowing through, and you can see on chart B that international capacity was only down by 4.5%. And if you compare that across other markets, it had a stellar performance based on that. And we expect India to be the next China over the next 5 years. And a lot of destinations are actually looking at pivoting to India as a key source market into the future. So there's a lot of different strategies that they're deploying, trying to get different segments, different packages, different interest groups, and so forth. So that's one of the key markets we think that will excel in the near term. So international capacity still remains stuck where lockdowns have been eased, and that's contributable to many different factors. So airlines are slow at reinstating capacity, as well as I mentioned, manpower shortage has created a bit of dilemma for some international carriers. China, Taiwan, and Japan's continued lockdown are holding back a wider regional recovery. So if you look at China itself, in 2019, it actually, in the ASEAN region, it contributed to 32.3 million tourists, which accounted for 22% of all visitor arrivals into the region. So that's quite a significant contribution that the Chinese market was making for the ASEAN region. So we do not expect significant change in Chinese policy before mid-2023. And Japan is also a bit of a slow mover in terms of opening the market. So that's going to make some difference moving forward. So here we've got a snapshot of 4 different markets. So you've got Singapore, India, Malaysia, and Thailand. And you can see by 2019, the blue line, and 2022 in the red line, to see how that's progressing for specific markets. So I think the attention I would like to draw to is India market. So India has overtaken 2019 market by a significant volume since recovery has been quite strong, robust, and domestic. It's mainly driven by domestic travel within India. So, but you can see Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand catching up, and that will probably take into the next 12 months before they can actually close that gap. But as I mentioned previously, that Northeast Asia is quite an important market for the recovery. So I think that will all depend on how the reopening in China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan will take place. So our assessment for 2022, available capacity will not recover about 55% of 2019 levels in Asia region this year. So while we're quite optimistic that things will progress, but in a very slow manner. So you may see some sort of a stagnation. And that, again, could be contributable to various factors like inflation, geopolitical tension, and economic recession that could actually play a key role in terms of how the recovery will pan out. Consumer confidence remains weak, but it's recovering rapidly as markets reopen. Again, so that will be attributable to government economic policy and how they actually relax some of the protocols with arrival and departure. Connecting traffic typically accounts for over 30% of traffic in major markets. And if you look at major hubs, that's significantly higher because it's looking at different traffic flows between different markets. Until all markets are fully open, then a complete recovery is impossible. And that again is the question on when China will reopen. And again, China and Japan signifies two of the largest markets in Asia. And that will all depend on how they approach the reopening. So all this question links up with aviation landscape. So aviation was probably the most impacted sector within travel 2 years back. So we think that low-cost carriers will move faster, much faster than the legacy competitors, where they'll secure larger market share. They'll be adding new routes and frequencies. And we'll look at later on about new aircraft models, and they'll be facing very large single-aisle aircraft fleet across the regions and opening secondary points. And some of the airlines here, namely Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific, they've taken a dual brand strategy where they have a full service carrier supplemented with a low-cost carrier model. So that will give them some flexibility in terms of the segments that will recover faster and be able to actually tap into those travelers and create new destinations within the network. We expect there to be fewer major hubs in the Asia-Pacific region as carriers and networks are adjusted. So that will depend on the traffic flows. There will be different origin destinations that will be created and different markets that will be served on our primary long thin routes as well as the key trunk routes between primary and secondary points. Things are changing, and although it appears slow now, change will accelerate in 2023. So we think within the next 12 months, we'll probably see some acceleration. And here's some examples on how that would go. So long haul low cost, we know that we feel it's going to be a toast for most because of the cost and the economic viability of operations. So if you look at 2019, 12 of these low-cost carriers operated 101 routes around the world, operating nearly 19,000 flights. But if you contrast that to 2022, that's 6 low-cost carriers that will operate 20 routes with just over 5,000 flights planned. So these are on the long-haul low-cost basis. So it's badly damaged because of 2 main factors. One is the fuel cost, as we know, that's increased quite significantly. It's doubled in the past 6 months, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the LCC model's viability. And all the airlines will be paying around $115 billion more in fuel this year. So that's contributing to a lot of projections on how capacity will come back. Some airlines will be a bit more conservative than others, and that will have a great impact on their profitability and bottom line. The need for self-connect traffic on an international to international passenger basis remains, but restrictions prevent these flows from happening purely because of government regulation, paperwork, and different protocols that are in place for certain markets. So potentially an LCC with a wider airline group may have a niche to play, as I mentioned. There are different airlines like Qantas, Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific that have a dual brand strategy, and that gives them a bit of flexibility in terms of shifting their business models around during this period. So legacy and low-cost carriers will expand its network range with single-aisle fleet. So the Airbus A321XLR will allow both legacy and low-cost carriers to compete in long-haul markets with a cost-effective aircraft right-sized to secondary markets. So to give you an example, you could look at various secondary points in Japan that would actually make a very good destination on a non-stop basis from Southeast Asia. So that's something that airlines will be looking at through the recovery pattern, tapping into some of these secondary points that were not viable in the past. So rather than flying into large hubs in Japan, they'll be able to go directly from major major cities from Southeast Asia into secondary points in Japan market. And some of these airlines in Asia, such as Qantas, AirAsia, Vietjet, and of course Air Arabia, when we look at the Pater's Asia definition, they've all ordered the Airbus A321XLRs to take advantage of this niche aircraft that can actually do long haul secondary point flying. 22 airlines have ordered over 450 of this aircraft type, with delivery starting next year. So there's plenty of potential for air service development, connecting different destinations and source markets and creating that niche for the DMOs and destinations out there. In conclusion, Asia Pacific appears to have been late in recovery, but that's not a bad thing in the long term. We are seeing increased industry consolidation, technological advancements such as aircraft type that will be deployed by different airlines that have ordered that aircraft, changing consumer behavior, so the way people will travel, the timeline for booking a trip will all change, and that will shape the future of travel for the next decade. So I think we're in an exciting time, and I think there's plenty of lessons that can be learned from other regions that have reopened much earlier than Asia, and Asia Pacific can look at that and learn some of those lessons and implement that as we continue our recovery trajectory. So again, we feel it's an exciting time to be in the travel sector, and every day brings something new, something exciting. And of course, there's challenges and there's new ways of creating niche and marketing these type of opportunities that will arise. Again, thank you very much for your time, and to Pater for inviting OAG to share our thoughts for the Asia Pacific recovery.
Thank you very much, Matt, for that very insightful presentation regarding aviation. And let's just keep things moving right along with our next presenter. As always, if you have any questions for Matt, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We'll be back for our panel discussion just after this last presentation. And last, certainly not least, we have the Senior CEMEA Economist and Director of Business and Economics Insights at Visa. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mohammed Bardestani. Mohammed, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Just give me a second. Let me share my screen. Could you just confirm if you can see my screen?
Just give a second here. Still loading. Yes, looks good.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. As a quick introduction, my name is Mohammed Bardestani. I'm the CEMEA economist at Visa. And in this session, we thought we would shed some extra light on the travel recovery in Asia Pacific by leveraging some of the unique visa data that we see from our data sets. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. You know, the COVID shock has been one of the most damaging shocks that the travel and tourism industry has seen. And it's unlike anything we've seen before. And we've seen major shocks before, you know, such as 9/11, the Ebola outbreak, SARS, but nothing even comes close to what COVID has done to the industry. So as an example, if we look at the number of travelers, in 2019, it was around 1 billion. Once COVID shock, you see a very sharp drop to less than 300 million. So this is like a very significant disruption to the industry. And if we look at industry forecasts, many of them suggest that, you know, we're unlikely to return to the pre-pandemic level of travelers until 2024. And one thing that distinguishes, you know, COVID from the other shocks that we've seen in the industry is the fact that COVID has been very globalized in nature. Let's say for SARS, the Ebola, or 9/11, they were more localized, more regionalized, more country specific. And this is one reason why we see very sharp drop in the number of travelers. And if we look at global travel spend, it's more or less the same story. You know, you see a very sharp drop in 2020, and we're unlikely to return to their pre-pandemic level until at least 2024, as some of the forecasts suggest. And one reason why this has been the case, and one reason why travel and tourism industry has been lagging other industries in terms of the recovery, is the fact that we are still seeing significant travel controls across many countries around the world. So on the vertical axis, we have the number of countries, and then we're just going to display some of the policy measures. So if we look at Jan 2020, which by now seems like decades ago, most countries did not have any restrictions on foreign inbound travel. But once COVID hit, we've seen different countries adopt different policies in their effort to basically control and limit the spread of the virus, ranging from a complete ban on foreign inbound travel or requiring some quarantine or medical screening. And I think this is, the most critical impediment to the recovery in the travel and tourism industry. But if we have a more, forward-looking glass half full view, we can see that, since January or since early 2020, or since early 2022, sorry, the light blue color, where it denotes that no restrictions have been gradually increasing. So I suspect as we move forward and more countries relax restrictions, we're likely to see a stronger recovery in global travel and tourism. One thing is clear, however, that while we still have a significant amount of restrictions on travel, once borders are reopened and travel restrictions are eased, there is a strong case and a clear case of pent-up demand by households. So if we take this as an example, and just before, just as a quick explanation, the size of the circle or the bubble size denotes the size or the number of outbound travelers in each country. And then the yellow shades or the shades of colors capture basically the recovery in travel comparing 2021 to 2019. So the lighter the color, the better. And what we can see from Europe is that we've seen stronger recoveries in Germany and France in terms of outbound travel. And if we look across other regions, you can see that there's significant variation in the number of outbound travelers from the US, Brazil, Canada, Saudi Arabia, and so on. What I wanted to highlight is like where Asia Pacific lies. And based on the previous presentations that we've seen, one thing stands out that, for sure, AP is still lacking other regions in terms of travel recovery. And one reason why this is the case, because generally speaking, restrictions in Asia Pacific on foreign inbound travel have been a bit more stringent than other countries. But again, trying to look at the glass half full, what that means is that, when we look forward for the second half of 2022 or 2023, it means Asia Pacific probably holds one of the highest potentials for travel recovery going forward, because you have a lot of households that did not travel over the past couple of years. They have these accumulated savings, and there are many surveys suggesting that there is strong case of pent-up demand by those countries. So I think again, like as we move forward, we're likely to see stronger recovery from those countries. And digging one step further and looking at a more granular level of visa data. So on the vertical axis, we have travel recovery. So what we essentially look at all the cards issued in a given country, and then we look at what percentage of consumers are active on cross-border face-to-face travel. And in this case, I'm going to be comparing April 2022 to April 2019, so the pre-pandemic level. And it's quite simple to read. So if it's above 100, it means the share of consumers active on travel spend is above pre-pandemic. And if it's below 100, so in the red shaded area, it means that the percent or the share of consumers active on cross-border travel is still below pre-pandemic. And here we have a scatter plot of the countries. And you can see basically where the countries, each country lies. So as an example, how you'd read this, Australia is above 100, which means, if we compare April 2022 to April 2019, we're actually seeing an increasing number or a higher number of consumers active on travel spend compared to their pre-pandemic level in April. One thing you will notice in this graph that the majority of countries, be it in AP or other, lie below or in the red shaded area, which means basically that most of them are still have room to recover, and most of the consumers or the number of consumers who are active on travel are still below the pre-pandemic level. So ignoring the vertical axis for now and looking at the horizontal axis, here we're looking at spending recovery. So just to be clear again, we're looking at spending per card, and we're comparing April 2022 to April 2019. So the further you are to the right, or in the green shaded area, it means spending per traveling card is above the pre-pandemic level. And then if you're on the red shaded area or further you are to the left, it means spending per traveling card is below the pre-pandemic level. So again, if we display the countries in a scatter plot, we can see, as an example, if we look at New Zealand and Singapore. So within AP, whenever someone is actually traveling, we see the amount of expenditure actually higher than the pre-pandemic level. And then you can see that the majority of the countries within AP, so if we look at Australia, Japan, Thailand, and Malaysia, spending is actually, again, like has a bit of more room to recover to the pre-pandemic level. Now, putting this complex, relatively simple graph together, we have 4 quadrants. So if we look at the top left, which is shaded in blue, this is where spending has not recovered yet to the pre-pandemic level for Australia, but the number of travelers has actually recovered to the pre-pandemic level. And then if we look at the top right, which is France, shaded in green, and ideally you want to see all those countries in that quadrant. This basically means both the spending as well as the number of travelers have recovered above the pre-pandemic level. And then in the red shaded area, you can see that this is basically the area where it shows the countries where both spending as well as the number of travelers is still below the pre-pandemic. And finally, the area with the gray shaded area, it is basically where spending is above the pre-pandemic level, but the number of travelers is yet to recover. So I think this graph basically, shows a quick summary of where countries within AP, as well as compared and benchmarked to other countries, lie on the, the recovery spectrum. So I think it provides some powerful insights for each country where it lies basically on the recovery spectrum. And before I end, I wanted to highlight one more thing. If you remember from the past couple of years, there were a lot of reports, research, articles suggesting that business travel is dead. It's unlikely to return back to normal. Virtual calls, Zoom or Microsoft Teams are going to completely replace in-person, business travel. So I thought, when I was reading these things, I did not necessarily subscribe to them, but I thought, what, instead of just having an opinion, let me go and explore our data and see what I can glean in terms of business travel recovery. So here, let's look at China as an example. And again, just to be clear, we're comparing April 2022 to April 2019. And in this case, I'm looking at consumer cards that are active on travel spend. And I'm equating this. So whenever I see consumer card, I say, okay, this is leisure travel. And then I look at business, I look at commercial cards and I say, okay, this is likely to, reflect business travel. One thing you will notice is that, yes, business travel is lagging leisure travel, but it's not to the extent where it's, completely dead and it's not going to return to normal and so on. And this is, and China is not an anomaly. If we look at other key countries in AP, the story is more or less quite similar, where business travel, yes, is lagging leisure, but I would say it's still, it's surprised, like business travel has surprised to the upside too, as far as I can tell. And one explanation, like for me, the way I think about it is, while maybe you can replace internal meetings within the same company or within the same organization with virtual calls, I think when you're trying to acquire a new client or develop relationship with existing clients, or you're attending, conferences or training, you still actually need to travel, and especially if you're dealing, with the manufacturing sector where you need to actually go and see the, inspect the goods, make sure everything in terms of operations are going well and smoothly. So I think, yeah, generally speaking, I would say, based on the data that I can glean from Visa, business travel has actually surprised to the upside. There's obviously still more room to grow for both leisure and business, but this will largely depend on how and when the restrictions on travel ease going forward. So this is all I had. This was my last slide. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for your presentation. And now we're going to bring all the speakers back. And let me just share the screen real quick. So helping me moderate this session is PATA CEO, Ms. Liz Ortiguera. And now we'll do a quick panel discussion. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. I do see a couple questions there. We have everyone back, Mac, Mohammed, Caroline, and Dr. Liu. And Liz is here. So Liz, you want to start off with the first question?
Well, first of all, I want to give a big thanks to all of our presenters. Certainly during this recovery period with multiple factors at play currently globally and within our region, it's so important to get the different perspectives. And I can say that I certainly learned something from each one of you. And so my thanks for giving that varied perspective on how our industry is recovering, how it's different, and how we can all respond to this in terms of finding the opportunity to recover. So maybe I'll start with Caroline. Caroline, you showed some interesting trends. You mentioned there was one chart regarding interest in sustainable travel. Can you share, how in the context of your research, like how do you define that? What kind of decisions factor into a factor as sustainable travel?
Sure. So basically that data is from our consumer lifestyle survey, where we speak to 40,000 consumers in 40 different countries. And so what I did was pull the data for the individual countries. But if you, and basically we've defined, we asked them specific questions, and then we've categorize them whether it's sustainable or mass market. So for mass market, this would include if you buy a package, if you choose convenient package solutions, if you choose all-inclusive, if you choose a city break or a shopping break. So that's mass market. And then on the opposite side, we have sustainable features if you choose at least nature-based, adventure, sports, wellness, basically what else? Immersion in culture, if you're interested in arts and culture and heritage, and ecotourism. So those are the options that we give the respondents. And then, as I say, I've grouped them into whether they're mass or sustainable. And globally, 65% have chosen at least one sustainable travel feature, and then 75% have chosen at least one mass market travel feature. And when I looked at the Asia Pacific data, I could see that there was a stronger interest in sustainability. And I've done a comparison based on the question in the Q&A and looked at, well, has there been an increase over 20, even if more people are choosing sustainability in, say, Thailand or Indonesia, if they're choosing mass market rather than sustainability, has there been an increase? And overall, there's more interest shown towards sustainable travel features than mass market. So you see that mass is declining year on year. So it does mean that people are looking for something beyond the traditional. And that's why I think it's, we know that creating niche segments is very appealing, whether it's nature-based, community-based, whether it's arts and culture, whether it's wellness, that's really appealing for consumers, and it's also more sustainable in the long run for communities and the environment.
That's fantastic to hear. So thank you for that, Caroline. I'll revert back to Professor Song and Professor Liu. It's interesting to see the step change recovery that you've observed in different parts of the region, and the complexity being, it may not be a change in the destination market, but certainly the key source markets for that. Are there any other kind of lessons that you've observed in terms of the incremental improvements for some certain parts of the region? Has it really been? Oh,
Professor
go
Song, I
ahead.
think you're on mute.
All
Professor
right,
Song?
okay, so let me go first, then you can supplement. So
Okay.
I think the difficulty in generate the forecast is that if you look at the major source market in Asia Pacific, the largest outbound tourist market is China. So China is still closed, and actually markets already predicted China probably will remain closed until 2003, mid 2003, right? So this is something that we have to think about. If most of the destinations within the region, with the largest market being China, and is still closed, so even the destinations restrictions has been fully relaxed, but there's no market for your tourism, so you're not going to recover very quickly, as we would hope so, right? So this is something that we have to bear in mind. That China is the main country, a source market that we have to watch out. I think all the destinations will be anxiously waiting for the news when China is going to open. Hong Kong and Taiwan, Japan are also probably similar. So the policies are still quite stringent. And even the destination market are open, but if the source market is still closed, it's not going to recover very quickly.
Professor Liu, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, follow up Professor's answer, and I think maybe my answer can also address. I think there is one of questions about the business travel. I think that well, for the business travel, yes, most destinations are ready to embrace the visitors back. But in addition to the border close of key source markets, we also need to keep in mind that the policy uncertainty. This can also keep the business travel away from the key destinations, although it's already open, but the uncertainty of the COVID and also the policy may still lower down the recovery of the business travel.
Okay, great, thank you. And my next question is directed to Mac. You used an intriguing phrase there, that India is the new China. And you certainly shared how aviation's recovery, the new routes, new capacity or current traffic are kind of creating a reordering, at least in the short term. Which trends would you anticipate would have more mid to long-term implications?
So that's relating to the India market? Yeah.
Or in general?
Okay, so I think what we've noticed with some of our customers, the destination management companies out there, they're looking at new source markets to pivot away from the delayed reopening of Chinese market. So as I mentioned, ASEAN region accounts for about 22% of Chinese tourists into the region. So I think from a midterm perspective, India is a potential market for some of these Southeast Asian countries to sort of look at creating. So especially in places like East Malaysia, where they've traditionally had China and Korea as the key source market, they're looking at new markets to sort of pivot towards to actually fill in that gap, because they've got room nights to actually fill. and also for the industry to collectively recover at a faster scale, rather than waiting for China to open or Japan to open. So I think some of these key markets will need to pivot towards some of the secondary points. And I think aircraft model, as I mentioned, the A321 XLR, will have that opportunity to create the secondary points from long distance, long haul markets from Southeast Asia into Japan, Korea, and Taiwan.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then over to Mohammed. You mentioned that business travel spend recovered more more positively than anticipated. There's a link here. Do we have a sense of how business travel is rebounding in APAC? So maybe I'll go back to the business travel spend that you're seeing. Is it that business travelers are spending more per person, or is it it just volume is coming back better than anticipated?
So I would say, just to be clear, in terms of the recovery in business travel, when I say it's surprised to the upside, as in like it was better than we initially feared. Because if you remember, especially in the initial period of the pandemic, in the first few months, everyone, I don't know, like I can't remember how many articles I've read where they were saying that business travel is dead, it's never going to go back, and so on. So I think, generally speaking, from the data that we can see, it's surprised to the upside. So what we essentially do, we look at all the commercial cards issued in a specific country with an AP. And then we look at, what percentage of them are active on cross-border travel spend. And I would say, to my surprise, I've been seeing relatively healthy levels, not as close as to what we used to see pre-pandemic level, but as shared in one of the slides where I highlighted, China, Australia, or some of the other countries. I think, generally speaking, it's been healthier than initially feared. That's how I would characterize it.
Okay, great. And maybe this is an open question to all our panelists. With the insights that you've had, are you seeing a trend towards longer, more multi-purpose journeys emerging through this recovery?
So that's a very big question. Yeah, from what we have seen so far, when it's recovered, actually the travelers seems to be traveling a longer because probably this is a revenge traveling have suppressed in the last 2 years, and then spend more, which has been reflected in the visa data if they travel cross-border travel. I think that probably is a short to medium term trend. I don't think this trend will continue into the future in the long run, but at least in the next 2 or 3 years, you will see people probably travel longer in terms of duration, probably multiple destinations, and spend more because of the suppressed travel over the last 2 years. I think that's some data already show that, yes.
Yeah, and Liz, from our observation, what we've noticed is when Singapore opened the vaccinated travel lanes last year, so long haul markets were available, so people actually chose long haul. So our prediction around regional travel, mid haul, then long haul, it actually changed the pecking order. So long haul started because of the absence of other regional markets at that time. But the way we see the traffic movements, there's a lot of people from Singapore. What we've noticed from our home market here is that people are going on short haul destinations for a short break. So that's kind of changing. The trends are changing, and I think business travel as well. So you've got some key markets that are quite open to business travel, but there's a lot of people that are actually using that revenge travel to take a business class trip. So that could be distorted in terms of the way airlines would view their forward bookings in premium cabin. So a lot of that is attributable to leisure travel that people are saved up for the last two years and splurging that out in a bit of luxury travel. when traveling long distances.
Great.
Liz, I was just going to say, today, this morning, the World Economic Forum launched their latest Travel and Tourism Development Index. And Euromonitor was one of the partners that helped contribute to the data. And so I got a sneak preview of the report. And one of the trends that they highlight is the rise of bleisure. You know, it's an awful word, but it is that sort of the combined business plus leisure. And if you think about some of those disrupted business travel habits, the Great Resignation, you know, people reassessing their values, travel is still very much, you know, a key aspiration for many, especially the younger generations. It's very experiential. So I do feel that we're moving in. I think what Mohammed said, it's great to see that the business cards, that are the spending is there and that it's not completely dead, but it's definitely disrupted and it's definitely changing.
I agree that this is a space to watch. I think certainly, for example, with the rise of virtual teams, the ease of using Zoom now, which will replace, you know, a number of meetings, but I do think a new form of travel will emerge, you know, different forms of travel like retreats for distributed teams. You know, and we've got some companies that are announcing, you know, complete work from home or work from any, we heard publicists say work from any office. So I think there are corporate trends that will certainly have a knock-on effect, and a different form of travel will be emerging, and not just for the short term, but in mid to long term. Great. I'm going to answer one of the questions here that's in the Q&A, which is more directed to Pata. What is Pata's suggestion or the most urgent need towards the government in the region to create significant tourism rebound as the restrictions remain in place in some countries? I would say that, you know, in line with what Caroline reported, I've seen other reports that also say that a number one priority for travelers is, whether you're corporate or leisure, is safety and health, and assurances that you're going to have a smooth journey. So I would advocate for all our destination members that making sure that you provide clarity towards your requirements, whether it's testing or whether it's, you know, what if I do test positive in COVID, you know, what happens to me? Can I quarantine in my hotel, or do I need to go to the hospital? Do I have a choice in hospital? I think that, you know, having that knowledge is one level of assurance for travelers that they're not going to be surprised. And I think that's very important. And, you know, in addition, I think, you know, the ministries across the region in Asia Pacific have been, you know, quite focused and vigilant about vaccine deployment. And that's been, you know, I view that as a really important foundation. And while Asia Pacific has been more restricted than the other regions, you know, I very much advocate that it's not because they're riskier. Actually, they're managing risk quite well compared to many other markets. And some developed, you know, emerging economies have been managing it more vigilantly than some wealthy nations. So it's not a sign that it's more risky. It's actually that there's more caution, and that equates to more safety and security. But I do think it's very important for destinations to give clarity to, you know, what will my journey be like, and what is the implication in the event that I do get sick. And so I think that's become a critical part of destination marketing so that people feel more comfortable. Paul, perhaps, you know, do you have any other questions to add?
Yeah, I do have a question for Mac. You know, it's kind of based on what Caroline said too. You know, we have inflation is rising. You know, we're seeing it was 8% thing from Caroline's presentation, and then you had mentioned rising fuel costs. Do you think that will also then lead to higher air ticket prices in the coming months? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, so that's a good question. Actually, that's been debated quite significantly recently. So airfares, so it's linked to a few things. So one is high fuel costs. So anything above $100 barrel, and depending on the airline's hedging profile, will have an impact as to what sort of fares they set. The second component is capacity. So where there's lack of capacity and competition, what we've witnessed is that the fares tend to be much higher in those particular segments there. Where you've got more competition, where you've got hubs that are operating now, then you can actually get a better deal. For example, if you look at Singapore to Europe, it's far cheaper to actually go on Turkish via Istanbul, because the Turkish network tends to connect to many different points in Europe. So again, competition intensity plays a key role. So I think moving forward in a couple of months, we will see fares coming down as competition kicks in and airlines make a move into specific markets. So at the moment, home carriers tend to command a larger premium over the foreign carriers there. And there are deals to be had if you're looking at one-stop service. So a lot of travelers there are a bit risk averse in terms of safety protocol. They prefer non-stop flight because when you connect on a hub basis, you're mixing with other travelers, and the risk tends to go up significantly from that perspective.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good to hear that you're optimistic that prices will go down. I think there's always a concern from people that that have spoken at previous meetings at ours, that concern about maybe higher ticket prices because of rising fuel costs and inflation. Liz, do you have another questions that you want to ask them, or did we already answer this last question here?
Maybe I'll ask Professor Song, what do you think of Mac's comment about India being the new China?
It's a very bold prediction, I would think. I think this probably would depend on how India will develop in terms of economy, right? Pre-COVID-19, India only sent out about 26 million people out in terms of international travel. Well, China sent out 130 million before 2020, before COVID-19. So there's a huge gap already. But China, according to whatever the prediction given by World Bank or IMF, so still the growth rate will be around 4 or 5% over the next 5 to 10 years. And also the middle class population in China is much larger than India, and also probably growing faster than India. So I think there's quite a long way to catch up in terms of international travel. But you never know. So what happened to the Chinese economy in the next 5 years? But I think this prediction is quite bold.
Well, I think one lesson here is that in the absence of China in the short term, I think what it's teaching businesses is to work harder to look for opportunity. And it'll be interesting once China opens up. Now markets will be more diversified. Plus, they'll have the benefit of the strong Chinese inbound traveler. And so I think that, but for this period, it really is a practice of being innovative, looking for new opportunities where you can find them. So it's a bit of it's an obstacle course for everyone. My hope is that, with insights like these from our panel of experts, it helps, our industry members navigate and find those opportunities while we've got short-term hurdles. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone on the panel. I think it's been a very insightful and diverse set of views to the recovery. And so my thanks as Pata.
Thank you.
Well, yes, we actually just come to the end of the session. So thank you very much, Liz, for doing an excellent job moderating that panel. And thank you again to all of our speakers for spending time with us to provide their insights on the recovery. So thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing your insights with us. So with that, I'll do a quick wrap up, and you guys can all say a goodbye to the audience.
Yeah.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
And thank you, Mac. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Professor Song, Dr. Liu, and of course, Caroline. So I'll just do a quick wrap up as we end today's session. So actually, our forecast updates will be released next week, June 2nd. You'll be able to find it at our website at www.pada.org/catalog. You can also still download, purchase and download the full report and executive summary, as well as our individual destination reports, which are available now on our website. And I just want to make you aware of a couple of activities we have coming up in the next weeks and months ahead. So the first thing I want to make you aware of is for our members, we have a PADA members invitation to private networking sessions. So it's happening on June 14th and 15th. We provide different times to cater to the different time zones. So feel free to join us either on Tuesday, June 14th or Wednesday, June 15th. For more information about the networking sessions, feel free to email memberships@pada.org. This is a good chance to network with our various members from across the region and also go into various breakout rooms to have a more deeper, intimate discussions. You also have our first in-person event since the pandemic in August 2nd to 4th. This is our PADA Destination Marketing Forum 2022 under the theme Building Back Sustainably Through Cultural Heritage and Community-Based Tourism. It's happening in Songkhla, Thailand. You know, Thailand has just eased a lot of the requirements to come into the country, so it's a perfect time to join us in Songkhla for the Destination Marketing Forum. The event is complimentary. However, due to limited seating, PADA members will give them priority on a first come, first served basis. Next, we have our PADA Annual Summit. This is happening on October 25th to 27th in Ras Al Khaimah, UAE. It's a 45-minute drive from Dubai under the theme Reconnecting the World Sustainability. It's our big thought leadership event, so please do join us. I will just let you know that the prices you see right now on our website are our early bird rates. They will be ending at the end of June. And so if you take advantage of the rates, take advantage of the early bird rates and register today before they do go up after June. So please do take a look at the website for more information about that. And also just a reminder, our PADA Gold Awards is now open for applications. So deadline for submissions is June 30th. So if we have two broad categories, marketing and sustainability and social responsibility. There are actually a couple more categories to be announced, so please keep an eye out for any announcements. But please, if you're interested, go ahead and visit our website or apply today. If you have any questions about today's webinar or any of our upcoming activities, you can email me directly at paul@pada.org, or you can visit our website at www.pada.org. So with that, that ends today's session. So once again, thank you to all of our speakers from OAG, Euromonitor, Visa, of course, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Thank you very much to our CEO for moderating the panel discussion. And always thank you to our members, our partners, our live members for the continued support of the association. And last and not least, thank you to all of you for joining today's session. With that, please stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you at either the next webinar or at our actual in-person events, either in Songkhla or the UAE or in Ras Al Khaimah. Take care. Have a good afternoon.